Over the course of aeronautical history, which is only in the last 100 years or so, there have been many advancements and many mishaps. Oftentimes, when things go wrong, wrecks are left where they lay, becoming monuments to the bit of history that led to their end. Today, we're going to check out some of the stories that led to these surreal aircraft sites. These are the top 10 abandoned aircraft left as monuments. Number 10. Abandoned DC plane on Solheimasandur. On the vacant black sands of the beach at Solheimasandur, Iceland, you'll find this eerie sight of the lone fuselage of a US Navy DC plane. As you approach the relic, having sat abandoned for decades, it fills you with a surreal feeling, as there is nothing else around for almost as far as the eye can see. The DC planes are a series of planes that were made by the Douglas Aircraft Company, and the DC stands for Douglas Commercial. As these planes were used for passenger air travel, the planes that the company made during the 1930s and 40s had a lasting impact on the airline industry. It was back in 1973 that this DC plane supposedly ran out of fuel and had to perform a crash landing on these black sands on the south coast of Iceland. Luckily, all of the passengers survived, but the plane itself was done for. It was later found out that the pilot had simply switched over to the wrong fuel tank. The remains of the fuselage are still on the sand next to the sea. Number 9. Attu B-24D Liberator. This derelict bombardier, known as the Attu B-24D Liberator, is located on Attu Island in the Aleutian Islands of Alaska. This plane, the Consolidated B-24D Liberator, was designed by the Consolidated Aircraft Company in San Diego, California, and was introduced in 1941. The B-24 was created with a modern design, featuring a highly efficient shoulder-mounted, high-aspect ratio Davis wing. This style of wing gave the Liberator a high cruise speed, long range, and the ability to carry a heavy load. The Attu Liberator was purposely crash-landed on the island on December 9, 1942. It's one of only 8 D-model Liberators anywhere in the world, counting both partial and derelict remnants. The aircraft was serving on weather reconnaissance duty when it was prevented from landing at any nearby airfields due to poor weather conditions. Only one person, Brigadier General William E. Lind, was unable to walk away from the crash. Number 8. The plane wreck of Norman's Cay. In the late 1970s and early 80s, Norman's Cay, located in the Bahamas, was used for the smuggling of illegal substances by the Medellin cartel. The island provided a convenient stopping point for transportation between Colombia and the United States. The wrecked C-46 in the waters off the coast was actually a part of the operation, which was headed by the Medellin cartel co-founder, Carlos Leder. And of the relics left behind from his reign in the area, it's the most well-known. The remains of the C-46 plane are a popular spot to snorkel, and there's always been much uncertainty surrounding the wreck. The true story might not be as elaborate as some of the embellishments over the years, but according to Jack Reed, the man who was Leder's first pilot, the story is that Andy, another pilot, known as British Andy, was known to enjoy drinking, even being known to take a six-pack with him on a flight. One morning, Andy decided to do some practice flying when he made a miscalculation trying to land, which resulted in a damaged landing gear and propeller. Even though he managed to get the plane airborne again, it didn't last, and he went down in the sea. Lucky for him and his passenger, they both got away from the crash without a scratch. Number 7. Lady of the Lake. In a lake at the Eilerson Air Force Base in North Pole, Alaska, rests the Lady of the Lake, a former WB-29 Superfortress, a variant of the B-29 build by Boeing, which was originally built in the 1940s. The aircraft was used for weather reconnaissance, such as flying into the eye of a hurricane or typhoon to gather information, and this one would regularly fly over the North Pole. After being retired in 1955, the Lady of the Lake was mounted over the lake it now sits in and was used for open water extrication training for a time. However, one spring the water levels raised too high and submerged the majority of the aircraft, and there she remains, having earned her nickname. Number 6. Corsair plane wreck, Honolulu. Off the coast of Honolulu, this Corsair sits about 115 feet down on the sea floor, and while many wrecks are purposefully sunk off the coast of Oahu, this wreck was the real deal. The Vogt F-4U Corsair is an American fighter aircraft that saw a lot of use in the 1940s. The craft was originally designed and initially manufactured by Chance Vogt, before manufacturing was regulated by Goodyear and Brewster. The story of this particular Corsair's end is not particularly dramatic when compared to other plane wrecks. During a routine mission in 1948, its engine began to sputter and fail. Luckily, the experienced pilot was able to make a smooth water landing and rescued floating near the plane in a life jacket. After the ordeal, the plane itself was not even damaged. However, it couldn't float, so despite its expert water landing, it still sunk to the bottom of the ocean, which is where it lays now, home to eels and other sea life. Number 5. The Tucson Boneyard Project. In the spring of 2010, the Eric Firestone Gallery devised the idea for the Boneyard Project, along with curator Carlo McCormick. The project revives disused historical airplanes that have been retired through the creativity of contemporary artists who turn them into something beautiful. Entire airplanes and their elements are left out in aeronautic resting spots in the desert, known as boneyards, and are revitalized into works of art. Renowned street artists have come from around the world to the Pima Air and Space Museum in Tucson, Arizona, in order to resurrect these relics. The first part of the project debuted in the summer of 2011, with an exhibition of just the nose cones of planes. It was known as the Nose Job, and it was seen at the Eric Firestone Gallery in East Hampton, Long Island. It was the second installment, Round Trip, where artists painted entire planes. Number 4. Abandoned Catalina seaplane. Located on the beach of the Strait of Tiran in Saudi Arabia is this beautiful abandoned seaplane. The plane is a PBY-5A Catalina, a seaplane used by American forces in the 1930s, and it's been sitting here in the desert for 50 years. This particular craft was purchased by Thomas W. Kendall, a retired businessman, and before being abandoned, it was being used by him as a luxury flying yacht. In the spring of 1960, Kendall was traveling around the world on a pleasure trip with his family. They were also joined by a photographer, who was covering part of the trip for Life magazine. On the 22nd of March, they landed the plane at the Strait of Tirana, and they ignored someone shouting at them a warning that they shouldn't anchor where they had. The following afternoon, the Catalina was destroyed, presumably by Saudi Arabian forces, after being riddled with no less than 300 holes and running aground on a coral reef. Number 3. Khodynka Aerodrome. In Moscow, Russia, you can find the abandoned Khodynka Aerodrome, originally known as Frunze Central Aerodrome, which is an airport located 7 kilometers northwest of the center of the city. The original founding of the aerodrome took place on the 17th of June 1910, when the Moscow Aeronautical Society declared the allocation of land in the territory of Khodynka as an airfield. Thanks to aviation enthusiast donations, a runway and 6 small hangars for airplanes were constructed. The aerodrome was Moscow's only airport until 1941, at which point it became primarily used as a storage facility for disused aircraft. The airfield was also the site of the Russian National Aviation and Space Museum, which was only fitting as Khodynka truly was the birthplace and spiritual home of Russian aviation. Later, after the elimination of the museum, many of the aircraft in its collection were left outdoors, behind a low fence, and these historic aircraft, once the pride of the Soviet Union, were abandoned in place. Number 2. Gila River Memorial Airport. The Gila River Memorial Airport is a private airport owned and operated by the Gila River Indian Community, located southwest of Chandler, Arizona. When it was active, the airstrip was used for crop dusting aircraft and air charter operations, which had no scheduled commercial services. Built in 1942, it was originally named the Williams Auxiliary Army Airfield No. 5 as a satellite airfield. Even though it was in use for years, no hangar space was built at the airport until the late 1970s, so that the airport could host older piston-engined transport aircraft, many of which had been converted for use as air tankers. The airport is no longer in use and has been totally abandoned since the 1990s. It wasn't until 2007 that the Gila River Indian Community assumed control of the airfield and renamed it the Gila River Memorial Airport. And as of 2008, numerous aircraft were still present. Any further plans to expand or redevelop the airport are still in progress. Before we finish, I want to take this time to let you know that we really appreciate you watching our videos. And if you enjoy them, consider liking this video, subscribing to our channel, or leaving us a comment. We'd appreciate hearing from you. And finally, number 1, the Space Shuttle Challenger. The Space Shuttle Challenger disaster occurred on Tuesday, January 28, 1986, when the Space Shuttle Challenger broke apart and exploded 73 seconds into its flight. The spacecraft fell apart over the Atlantic Ocean near the coast of Cape Canaveral in Florida at 11:39 a.m. The disintegration of the vehicle beginning after a joint in its right solid rocket booster failed at liftoff. Parts of the shuttle, such as the crew compartment and many other vehicle fragments, were eventually recovered from the ocean floor. However, much of the wreckage still remains. In 1996, nearly 11 years after the disaster, 2 large pieces of Challenger's left wing washed ashore before being found in the surf at Cocoa Beach, Florida, a whole 20 miles away from the Kennedy Space Center. Though more pieces will surely wash up, much of the shuttle is fated to remain in the ocean forever.